Theo didn't realize the exact day his life started slipping into something heavier than exhaustion, because at first, it didn't feel like failure, it felt like delay, like something temporary, like life was just figuring itself out, and he told himself that enough times that it almost sounded true, almost convincing, almost comforting. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of a quiet American town, the kind where mornings were slow and predictable, where people drove the same routes every day, stopped at the same stores, and lived lives that seemed stable from the outside. But inside Theo's space, things were different. The dishes stacked a little higher each week, unopened mail gathered near the door, and the silence in the room felt less like peace and more like something pressing against his chest. He worked odd jobs, delivery driving, stocking shelves, helping move furniture when he could get the gig, but nothing steady, nothing that gave structure to his days. His routine wasn't really a routine, it was a reaction to whatever came his way. Some mornings he woke up early with intention, telling himself today would be different, that he would finally take control, finally make a plan, finally stop drifting, but by afternoon, that energy would dissolve into distraction. A phone in his hand, hours lost scrolling, convincing himself he needed a break before starting, always before starting, never actually beginning. What made it worse wasn't the struggle itself, it was the quiet belief underneath it, the one he never said out loud: someone will eventually help me figure this out. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but subtly. He thought maybe an opportunity would appear, maybe someone would notice him, maybe things would just align. He didn't depend on anyone directly, but deep down, he expected something external to shift his life into place. That belief stayed with him until one particular night. It was late, well past midnight, and the city had gone quiet in that way where even distant sounds feel isolated. Theo sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the dim light coming through the blinds, his phone dead beside him. No music, no noise, no distraction, just him and the stillness he had been avoiding for months. The weight of everything he had been postponing began to settle in. Bills. Uncertainty. The lack of direction. The feeling that time was moving whether he did anything or not. And for the first time, he didn't reach for something to escape it. He just sat there. That's when the thought came, not loud, not dramatic, but clear in a way that cut deeper than anything before it. No one is coming to save you. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. He waited, almost expecting his mind to soften it, to argue back, to offer comfort, but nothing came. There was no second voice telling him things would magically work out. There was no reassurance that help was around the corner. There was only that one realization, steady and unshaken. And strangely, instead of panic, he felt something else. Clarity. Because if no one was coming to save him, then there was no one to wait for. All the waiting he had been doing, the delays, the excuses, the tomorrow mindset, it suddenly looked different. It wasn't patience. It was avoidance. It wasn't hope. It was passivity disguised as optimism. Theo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and for the first time in a long time, he looked at his life without filtering it through comfort. He saw the inconsistency. The lack of discipline. The way he depended on motivation instead of building habits. The way he avoided discomfort, even when that discomfort was necessary. And it didn't break him. It grounded him. The next morning didn't come with a surge of energy or dramatic change. There was no transformation overnight. Theo woke up tired, just like before. The room looked the same. His situation hadn't changed. But something inside him had shifted. Instead of reaching for his phone, he sat up slowly and looked around the room, not with frustration, but with responsibility. No one was going to clean this for him. No one was going to organize his life, fix his habits, or create direction out of nothing. So he started small. He stood up and made his bed. It wasn't impressive. It didn't solve anything big. But it was intentional. It was something he chose to do, not something he felt like doing. Then he picked up the dishes. One by one. No rush, no frustration, just action. That day, he didn't try to fix his entire life. He didn't set unrealistic goals or create a perfect plan. He focused on what was in front of him. He cleaned his space. He wrote down the tasks he had been avoiding. He stepped outside for a walk without headphones, letting himself feel the quiet instead of drowning it out. And throughout the day, that thought stayed with him, no one is coming to save you. But now, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like control. Because if no one else was responsible, then everything he changed, no matter how small, belonged to him. That night, as he sat in the same room that had felt suffocating just a day before, something was different. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was moving. Theo wasn't waiting anymore. And that was the beginning. Theo quickly realized that starting was the easiest part. It felt good, almost deceptively good, in those first few days. Cleaning his space, waking up a bit earlier, writing down tasks, these things gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in a long time. It was new, and because it was new, it was motivating. Each small action felt like proof that he was changing, that he was finally stepping into a different version of himself. But motivation, he learned, doesn't last. And life doesn't slow down just because you've decided to improve. Within 2 weeks, the initial clarity that once felt sharp and steady began to blur under the weight of reality. Work became inconsistent again. Some days he had long hours of deliveries, other days, nothing came in. Bills didn't pause. Fatigue didn't care about his new mindset. And the quiet discipline he was trying to build suddenly felt like effort, constant, repetitive effort with no immediate reward. One morning, he didn't get up on time. At first, it seemed small. He woke up late, stared at the ceiling, and thought, I'll reset tomorrow. It was the same thought he had used for months before, but now it felt different, because he recognized it. He knew exactly where that thought led. Still, he stayed in bed. That day slipped. He didn't clean. He didn't follow his list. He distracted himself, telling himself he needed a break, that he had been doing well, that one day wouldn't matter. But one day turned into 2. And by the 3rd day, the old patterns were back, not fully, not as deeply as before, but enough to remind him how easy it was to fall. That night, Theo sat in his apartment again, the same silence surrounding him, but this time it didn't feel new. It felt familiar, dangerously familiar. He rubbed his face, frustrated, not because he failed, but because he understood why. Nothing external had caused this. No one had stopped him. He had simply chosen comfort over effort. And that realization hit harder than the first one. Because no one is coming to save you didn't just mean he had to start, it meant he had to continue, even when it stopped feeling good. Theo stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen. The sink had a few dishes again. Not as many as before, but enough to signal the direction things were going. He stared at them for a moment. Then he sighed, rolled up his sleeves, and started washing them. There was no motivation behind it. No sense of pride. Just a quiet decision, I'm not going back. That was the shift. Not excitement. Not inspiration. Commitment. The next morning, he forced himself out of bed. No negotiation, no internal debate. He didn't feel ready. He didn't feel energized. But he got up anyway, and that's when he began to understand discipline, not as something intense or dramatic, but as something almost boring. It was repeating the same actions, day after day, regardless of how he felt. It was doing things when there was no reward, no recognition, no visible progress. It was choosing effort when it would have been easier not to. Theo started building structure into his days, not perfectly, but intentionally. He set a wake-up time and stuck to it more often than not. He created a simple routine: clean up, move his body, go out and work, come back, review his day. Nothing complicated. Nothing overwhelming. But even with that structure, life kept pushing back. There were days when he worked for hours and barely made enough Days when exhaustion hit so hard that even simple tasks felt heavy. Days when he questioned if any of this effort was actually leading somewhere. One evening, after a long shift of deliveries, he sat in his car, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The street was quiet, lit by scattered streetlights. He felt tired, not just physically, but mentally. The kind of tired that makes you question everything. What if this isn't enough? What if I'm still not doing it right? For a moment, the old mindset tried to creep back in, the one that looked for escape, for distraction, for something easier. But this time, Theo didn't fully give into it. Instead, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. And he reminded himself of the truth that started all of this. No one is coming to save you. It didn't discourage him anymore. It steadied him. Because if no one was coming, then the only question that mattered was simple: am I showing up or not? Not perfectly. Not consistently in a flawless way. But enough to keep moving forward. Theo opened his eyes and looked out at the empty street. Nothing about his situation had magically improved. He wasn't suddenly successful. He didn't have everything figured out. But he was different. He was no longer waiting. And slowly, almost invisibly, that began to matter. Weeks passed, and while progress wasn't dramatic, it was real. His apartment stayed cleaner. His routines became more stable. His ability to push through discomfort improved, not perfectly, but noticeably. The setbacks didn't disappear, but they lost their power. Because now, when he slipped, he didn't stay down as long. He understood something most people avoid: falling off isn't failure. Staying down is. And every time he got back up, even if it was messy, even if it was late, he reinforced the one thing that was slowly changing his life: responsibility. Not the kind forced on him by others. The kind he chose. One night, as he sat by his window again, watching the dim glow of the town settle into silence, he realized something subtle but powerful. He no longer felt stuck. Not because his life was perfect. But because he was no longer passive inside it. The weight was still there: responsibilities, uncertainty, effort, but now it felt like something he could carry. Something he was carrying. And for the first time, that weight didn't feel like a burden. It felt like strength. Becoming the one who does. Change didn't arrive in Theo's life like a breakthrough. It didn't come with a single moment where everything suddenly made sense, or a day where he woke up feeling completely different, completely confident, completely in control. Instead, it built slowly, layer by layer, decision by decision, so gradually that if he tried to pinpoint when things truly shifted, he wouldn't be able to. Because the truth was, nothing dramatic happened. And that was exactly why it mattered. Months had passed since that night when he first sat in silence and accepted the reality he had been avoiding. His life still looked simple from the outside. He still lived in the same apartment. He still worked practical, sometimes exhausting jobs. He still faced uncertainty, still had days where things didn't go as planned. But internally, something had solidified. He had stopped negotiating with himself. Where he once relied on motivation, he now relied on structure. Where he once waited to feel ready, he now acted regardless of how he felt. The gap between thinking and doing had become smaller, tighter, more controlled. And that changed everything. His mornings became consistent, not perfect, but dependable. He woke up, got out of bed without hesitation, and started his day before his mind had a chance to offer excuses. The simple actions that once felt insignificant, making his bed, cleaning his space, organizing his tasks, had become automatic. Not because they were exciting, but because they were necessary. He no longer asked, "Do I feel like doing this?" He asked, "Is this what needs to be done?" And then he did it. That shift removed a kind of internal chaos he didn't even realize he had been living with. Decisions became simpler. Life became clearer. Not easier, but clearer. Theo also began to approach his work differently. Before, he treated it like something temporary, something he had to endure until something better came along. But now, he understood something most people overlook: if you can't show up fully where you are, you won't show up fully anywhere else. So he started treating every job, no matter how small, with intention. When he made deliveries, he focused. When he stocked shelves, he stayed present. When he took on physical work, he pushed himself to complete it with consistency, not just speed. It didn't make the work glamorous, but it made him reliable. And reliability began to open quiet doors. He started getting more calls. More consistent opportunities. People trusted him, not because he was extraordinary, but because he did what he said he would do, when he said he would do it. That trust built slowly, but it built something stronger than quick success. It built stability. There were still difficult days. Days where exhaustion hit hard. Days where nothing seemed to go right. Days where the effort felt repetitive, endless, almost invisible in its results. But those days no longer shook him the way they used to. Because Theo no longer saw discomfort as a sign to stop. He saw it as part of the process. One evening, after a long day of work, he returned home later than usual. His body was tired, his hands slightly sore, his mind quiet in that heavy, end-of-day way. He stepped into his apartment, set his keys down, and paused. The room was clean. Not perfectly, not like a showroom, but maintained. Lived in, but controlled. He walked to the window and looked out at the same street he had stared at months ago, when everything felt uncertain, overwhelming, undefined. The street hadn't changed. The town hadn't changed. But he had. And the difference was undeniable. Theo leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, not the kind that drifts into overthinking, but the kind that simply observes. He remembered the version of himself who waited. The one who delayed, who hoped things would somehow align without his full effort. The one who avoided discomfort, who depended on motivation, who believed, quietly, that something, or someone, would eventually push his life forward. That version of him felt distant now, not gone completely, but no longer in control. Because somewhere along the way, Theo had stopped looking outward for change and started building it inward, through action. And the most important part? He didn't need constant reminders anymore. That thought, "no one is coming to save you," had done its job. It had pushed him to start. But now, it had evolved into something else. Something stronger. I can handle this. Not perfectly. Not easily. But consistently. Theo began setting slightly bigger goals, not unrealistic ones, not the kind built on pressure or comparison, but practical ones rooted in growth. Saving more money. Creating more consistent income. Improving his physical endurance. Expanding his skills through real-world experience. He didn't rush it. He didn't try to skip steps. Because he understood something that once frustrated him: progress that lasts is built slowly. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't in a hurry to escape where he was. He was focused on becoming someone who could handle where he was going. Weeks turned into months, and that quiet discipline became part of his identity. Not something he forced, but something he lived. He still had moments of doubt. Still had mornings where getting up felt heavy. Still had days where he questioned if he was doing enough. But those moments no longer defined his actions. Because Theo had learned the difference between feeling something and following it. And that gave him control. One night, much like the one where everything began, he sat by his window again. The air was still, the town quiet, the same dim light stretching across the street. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. He sat there, calm, steady, present, not searching for answers, not avoiding anything, just existing in a moment he had built through months of effort. And without overthinking it, without turning it into something dramatic, he realized a simple truth: he had become the one he used to wait for. Not a hero. Not someone extraordinary. But someone dependable. Someone who showed up. Someone who didn't run when things got difficult. Someone who could carry responsibility without collapsing under it. And that was enough. More than enough. Because in a world where most people are still waiting, for motivation, for clarity, for someone to push them forward, Theo had stepped out of that cycle. He had accepted reality. He had taken ownership. And through consistent, often unremarkable effort, he had built something real. Not perfection. Not instant success. But strength. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't disappear when things get hard. The kind that stays. Theo looked out into the quiet night one last time before standing up, turning off the light, and preparing for the next day, not with excitement, not with fear, but with readiness. Because now, he understood something deeply, something unshakable: no one is coming to save you. And if you're willing to accept that, you don't need anyone to.